Hey guys! So in this video we are going to talk a little bit about Docker containers and just share some thoughts about when, why and what Docker containers actually are. So let's go through it. Let's get into it. So first and foremost, Docker containers, or Docker itself, is a application packaging system. What does that mean? Well, it means that it's a system that allows you to declare in an environment where you can actually run different types of applications. Think of it as a way for you to declare through a file or through a configuration, say, hey, I have this Node.js application, right? And in order for that to work, I need Node.js installed, I need probably some type of shell installed or something like that on some type of operating system, and I need these things in order for me to be able to run it. I probably need npm install as well to do some package management, right, or in package installs. And you see, the reason why you want to do this is because if you think about that, that's literally the same thing you do on your own computer. It's the same, and that's actually the idea. It's the same thing. You install all these dependencies onto your computer, and then you have an environment where you can actually run, say, Node or PHP or Ruby or whatever you want, right? Now, the reason why this is valuable is because it allows you to do two things mainly. The first and foremost thing is that it abstracts away the underlying operating system. What does that mean? Well, it means that when you then run a Docker container, you start the Docker container, it doesn't really matter what file system you use, what operating system you use, it can run anywhere. It's just a box that has a runtime, a Docker runtime, that allows it to do whatever it is that it does. That's number one. And the second thing is that it allows you to orchestrate multiple services together. And that's very, very powerful. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that traditionally what you had to do was that you would have to create a computer or a box or something like that on the internet, and you would use something like SSH, for example, and push all of your stuff to that system and manually start your system. That's it, said and done. That's actually a pretty great setup when it's that simple. The problem comes when you have a system that is massive. Maybe you have a system that uses several subsystems. Maybe you have one application that talks to a proxy or several other services that do different things, and maybe you have 3 or 4 services, and then you have a few databases that, you know, you might have Redis for caching, and then MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, like whatever you're using for your main storage solution. And the problem here is that when you have all of these different application needs, it becomes very tricky for you to orchestrate them all together. And that's where Docker comes in, because if you have packaged all of these applications in the same interface, you wrap them in the same interface, you can now start to make some assumptions, because you have something that ties it all together. And that allows you to use something like, say, Docker Compose or Kubernetes or something of that nature in order to orchestrate them in a very effective manner. And that's pretty cool, actually, because now you can actually declare in a configuration file or something of that nature that, hey, I want 3 containers with my application, and then I want a load balancer in front of that application so that, you know, my gateway or my users, they contact the reverse proxy or the load balancer, and then that distributes the connections to whichever application instance I have, and that in turn is managed by, say, a handful, 2-3 database instances. And that's it. What's beautiful about that is that now, with the basically the same amount of work, quote unquote, it's not exactly the same amount of work, you can spin up an entire cluster, or like a highly available and fairly robust system with the same amount of work you would have to invest as if you had like a single little command that you pushed some code, like how it used to be when you used to use FTP to just upload your little nice home page made in PHP, right? So the reason why Docker is, I'm not saying it's an industry standard, because it's not an industry standard, but it is it is one of the most impactful pieces of technology that is in modern software development. If you're not using Docker, I highly encourage you to have a look at it, because it's going to help you depending on your application, of course. Once again, remember, the benefit of Docker is when you have a system that needs multiple things. Like if you have at least one or two instances, like if you want to be able to install several databases and application servers and all that good stuff in an easy manner, that's when Docker becomes useful. Don't use it for your own little web application that doesn't even have a database. I mean, if you need, just a good rule of thumb is, if you need more than 2 commands to release your, well, bear with me, but if you need to push more than 2 code bases to your production environment, then Docker becomes something that is fairly useful. Now, I want to end on by saying something, because this is something that is very confusing for a lot of the beginners. Microservices are not the same thing as Docker container. The reason why people get confused is because microservices is very tightly coupled, or like the term is very tightly coupled to Docker. And the reason why this is because, honestly, microservices came around a long time ago, and we called it SOA or SOAP or whatever you want to call it. It used to be the case that you had a service-oriented architecture. That's the original idea behind this microservices idea. The problem back in those days was orchestration, which is one of the things I was touching on. Orchestration was so tricky that we couldn't really use microservices in an effective manner, because the complexity of microservices is enormous. Think of it as, instead of having 5 fairly big services that do a lot of stuff, you have 100 really, really small services that do all that stuff instead. Now, that is an enormous amount of overhead and operations work and all that great stuff, right? And that's where Docker kind of comes into this. Docker allows you to do that in a much more efficient manner, and that's why people mistake Docker containers, juniors mistake Docker containers for just being microservices. That's not true. You can have a massive monolithic application in one Docker container, and that works absolutely fine. In fact, I would actually tell you that that's the way you should start. If you're getting hyped up about microservices and you want to play around with it, do that, but don't build a production system using microservice architectures just right off the bat. It's not going to help you at all, actually. Use Docker containers, but lean back a little bit on the microservices thing, because it's not so easy as some of the public speakers out there on the internet might lead you to believe, to get that sort of thing right. So to summarize, Docker allows you to package applications and orchestrate multiple services that need to talk together in a very efficient manner. You can run one really big system as if it was just a much simpler system. And the reason why, when you should use it, is when you have more than one service. Maybe you have a few applications that need to talk to each other and a few databases and so forth. And you could use it for production purposes, and you can use it on your local desktop. Have a great day.